When you talk about, let's say, listening, for example, I mean, if you know somebody's listening to you, what's the emotion that you feel? It's an enabling emotion. It enables the right emotion if you listen. Now, in this case, between Johnny and the others, Johnny was obviously, in my mind, he was enabling a stronger emotion.
Mm. Good day. Welcome to Tip Talks. And tonight we do the much awaited analysis of the debate talents of the incomparable Johnny Antillon. And a shout out to our viewer who recommended him, Lucky Chris Ambos, for recommending Johnny Antillon for our show tonight. So I hope that, Lucky, you like what you hear tonight. And for our other viewers, we hope that you learn from it as well. So let me welcome my co-analyst. That's Paul Lazo, one of the regulars of the show. Paul, how are you tonight?
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm also excited about today, and the debate. Actually, the two levels that we'll have to look at: the speech itself, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of ideological, how would you say, discussion going on at the same time. And we can look at both, but let's focus first. I believe we should focus first on just the debate itself, the speech
Mm.
aspect of it. But I am
Yes.
excited, and also thank you to our viewer for recommending this. I didn't even know it existed.
Yeah,
I
me
had no
neither.
idea.
That's a
Okay.
pleasant surprise to watch him in action because I didn't know that we
Yep.
had debaters that good even in 1954. Oh my God. So thank you so much for recommending him. So without yeah, I won't say it because in Toastmasters it's an embolalia when we say that. So on with the show.
York Herald Tribune. How does the problem of communism in the United States compare with the problem of communism in other countries, and is there more than one solution? First of all, from the United Kingdom is Peter Hudson. Next to him, this tall boy from Norway is Gunnar Asland. He's been staying at Bentley High School, as you can see from that enormous button that he seems to be wearing on his lapel. This is Vangalya Ram from India. He's just spent his final day in Pearl River. Pearl River High School gave him such a beautiful present, a traveling clock, that he's especially pleased and proud with that. Finally, here's Johnny Antillon from the Philippines. Well, how about it, boys? How does America's communist problem compare with the communist problem in your countries?
The problem of communism in the United States is a psychological problem. The problem of communism in India is essentially born of frustration, a direct consequence of British imperialism.
I'll take you up on that in a minute. Well, in Britain, the problem is more or less the same as in America. Only in Britain, the difference is we don't call it a problem.
Well, I would say that the communist problem in America is much more difficult than our own problem, because in the Philippines, the communists act in the open, while here in America, they remain hidden.
Actually, I don't think the communist problem in America is more difficult than in Norway. I think the real problem lies in the way you are handling communism.
Coming back to what you said, Johnny, I thought you said that the problem of communism in the United States was more difficult. How would you, suggest a remedy for that?
Well, I will not sit you like a prophet and tell you what to do about your own problem. I do not pretend to know all the solutions against communism, although I will say that one of the best ways to combat communism is to take a militant stand against it. And one of the best ways to show your militant stand is to outlaw every communist party in every country in the world.
No. By doing that, you're using communist methods against the communists, which is defeating your very purpose. It is highly undemocratic, I think, to outlaw the communists, because that is the essence of democracy, to have difference and to give the opportunity for expression.
I know, but there should also be such a thing as limiting freedom. There is a distinction between freedom and license. A rattlesnake is dangerous. It would be undemocratic to limit its freedom in theory, but it is also wise to limit a rattlesnake's freedom.
Yes, but you are now taking it for granted that every communist is a traitor. I am not quite sure of that. I think it is wrong to persecute a whole group because of some mistakes on the part of its members. I don't doubt that there are communists who spy against their country. I don't doubt that there are communists who conspire to overthrow the government. But you cannot persecute a group as a whole because some of its members are criminals. Criminals should be punished as criminals, and you shouldn't persecute people for the sake of their opinions. And another thing, if you take the human rights away from the communists, well, why should the communists be interested in preserving democracy? I think that if you take away from the communists the freedom of expression, they will turn traitors.
I want to say that the communists already are traitors. They cannot turn into further traitors. I want to bring out this point. I want to state that every communist party in every country of the world is not a self-contained unit in itself. It is a branch of a world conspiracy with headquarters in Moscow. And the best way to cut off the body is by cutting off its arrows.
But there's one thing, Johnny. You see, you can prosecute a certain person only the moment he becomes subversive to law and order, but not till then. Till then it is his right to express himself, at least in a democracy, if it claims to be a democracy.
The minute a man joins a society with the avowed purpose of killing you and cutting your throat, he becomes a traitor to that society. He puts himself outside the pale and protection of the society because he totally rejects it.
But only after he makes an explicit statement of his purpose.
And does he not
till
make
then.
an explicit statement by joining it, by signing up for it, by giving an oath that he's going to turn against this government?
Peter's been trying to get a word
Isn't
in
that
here.
explicit enough?
I don't think so. You can't punish a man until he's committed a crime. At least in Britain you can't. You can't punish him for the thought.
I'm not punishing him for the thought. I'm just saying that he's joined an association of murderers. For instance, here is a group of 10 men. They've drawn up a plan to cut your throat. Then one man of the 10 actually goes out and cuts your throat. Does it stand to reason that the other 9 should be irresponsible or should be free from the blame?
I don't accept your premise that they're out to cut our throats.
And what else do you think that they're supposed to do? When they want to overthrow our society, overthrow our government, institute their own regime, institute their own reign of terror? What else do you want? There are more ways of cutting a throat than simply drawing a knife across it.
Well, but those people who plan to do this are individual persons. You cannot persecute the group as a whole because these individual persons are criminals.
I know.
How do you deal with them in Norway, Gunnar?
Okay, I'm going to pause this here and stop sharing for a while. I think
Interesting.
we have enough to react to it. And
Yeah.
I'm with you that we'll focus on the debate itself. Your thoughts, Paul?
Well, when you communicate, okay, it's not. We talk a lot about communication. We talk a lot about listening. Or there's that ever famous quote of what is it? You should listen to understand, and all of that. And those are all excellent quotes. But the one thing that most of them miss, I don't know, okay, or if they really even explain, is when you communicate, your desire is to enable an emotion from the other person. Okay, not just to understand and listen, but you have to enable an emotion. When you talk about, let's say, listening, for example, I mean, if you know somebody's listening to you, what's the emotion that you feel? It's an enabling emotion. It enables the right emotion if you listen. Now, in this case, between Johnny and the others, Johnny was obviously, in my mind, he was enabling a stronger emotion compared to the others. That's why I feel like he's coming across as maybe winning the debate, if you want to say. Okay. Now, this whole emotion part, it really doesn't make a difference whether you're right or wrong. It doesn't. Okay. It's really whether you're generating the right emotion. Pretty much that's what I'm noticing with his speech, the way he talks, I mean.
Thank you, Paul.
How about you, Dino?
My first reaction to it is this is not classic debate, because classic debate would have people on podiums behind lecterns, with the moderator standing in the middle and saying, "Hey, you've got 2 minutes to make your point. Your time begins now." So it's not like that at all. This was more like, not quite a fireside chat, but akin to it. So I'm a bit thrown off by the format that was used here, because in some cases, uh, there were people who were trying to finish their thought but weren't really able to do that, and then there are others who were reacting to what was being said without giving, what to me because I'm coming from the perspective of a contest judge, because I've judged so many debates already in the past, that in some cases, they didn't present enough evidence to support their point of view. But I did love the rattlesnake analogy, because it conjured up a mental image immediately in my mind, because hey, I don't like snakes either. And just because a snake is a reptile and obviously has a right to live in the wild, it's dangerous to me and the people I care about. So would I let it roam around, without trying to make sure that it can't harm other people? The answer is no. No, I would probably find a way to capture it and put it somewhere where it couldn't cause trouble. Now, if I use that analogy as, uh, to help explain what I think Johnny was trying to say when he, um, took difference from what the young man from the UK was saying and the young man from Norway was saying, because a challenge was made. So, how do you deal with it in your country? And he said, we deal with it, with a militant stance. And in some ways, I like the way that he defended his point by using the analogy, although at the moment I'm hoping that some of them will mention factual examples, dates, names, places, because that's what, as a judge, that's what really moves me to give points to
Right.
debaters, is that everybody will have an opinion in the same
Right.
way that everybody has a pair of eyes or
Mm.
a nose. And the real contest becomes how good they present their evidence, the kinds of evidence they present. Also, what matters is where they're coming from. Why are they saying this? In Toastmasters, we say the position, the reason, the example, and the restatement of the position. So, those are
Right.
my thoughts so far.
Well, and maybe it would help a little bit, but we also have to look at the historical context.
Mm.
Oh, what year is that? 56, right? I
At
saw it flash. I think it was 1956. I saw it
okay,
flash.
yeah.
But that was in the Philippines. We were just getting over the Hook Revolution,
True, true.
rebellion, sorry,
Mm,
which was communist, and we were dealing it militantly.
mm,
Okay, that's the way we chose to deal with it. So it didn't surprise me at all that Johnny answered that way, because that's the way we were dealing with it.
true.
In the U.S., it was the Red Scare, if
Mm.
I'm not mistaken. Okay, and when American historians look back at the Red Scare, they don't think it was a good thing
Yep.
in general.
Certainly
They don't.
McCarthy didn't. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, so even the Americans are not dealing it, wouldn't have dealt with it in a militant way, if you want to say. I'm not too sure what communism was going on in India or Norway, but Norway, we have to keep in mind that Norway was an ally of Hitler during World War II.
Oh, it was.
They
Mm,
were they were aligned. Okay,
mm,
I mean they didn't. I don't think they sent in soldiers and stuff, but they were like they were kind of aligned with Hitler.
mm,
Okay, so that might have influenced their talk. And the UK was obviously, I think they were also having a problem with their spies. I forgot. There's a
mm,
very famous case of a spy who was discovered, but pretty much the UK was just reflective of what the US was doing.
mm.
Okay,
True.
so those are things that we have to keep in mind as well. I mean, those are historical facts, if you want to say.
Yes, I get what you mean about the context, because in the U.S. There was also what we call the McCarthy era, where
Yeah,
pretty much everybody who was a card-carrying communist was persecuted. Hollywood actors
right.
and actresses were afraid to to declare their membership.
Yep,
Rightly so, because they were taken to explain why they joined. So in that particular era, that was probably when red tagging really first occurred, because somebody could
right.
be brought before the U.S. Senate to explain simply on somebody's accusation that, oh, I saw him attend the meeting, therefore he must be one of them. Yeah. So yeah. Uh, Still,
Right,
this
right.
is a great debate. So let's hear the continuation.
Well, in Norway, of course, we are quite afraid of communism because Norway has a border with Russia and we are in quite a dangerous position. But it is more of a security problem. There are not too many communists. The Communist Party is very small and it is decreasing from election to election. As I said, the problem is the security problem. But I think that the best way of dealing with communism as such a problem is to handle it in secret. I think it is terribly wrong to leave it to politicians, because politicians will always be on the look for votes and publicity. And they will make so much fuss about their affairs that any intelligent and dangerous traitor will get into a safe hiding place a long time before it comes to an investigation. So therefore, I believe that the communist investigation should be carried on in secret.
By the way, if I may put in a word about Gunnar saying that you should not prosecute the Communist Party because the individuals carry it out. I do say that even if the individuals are the ones who commit the crime, they do so upon the orders of the party and according to the plans of the party. Remember that a party is composed of individuals. Whatever the individuals do, the party is guilty of. The party is not an abstract idea. Whatever its members commit, then that is what it is guilty of. And then your second point, Gunnar, about saying that investigation of communists should not be left to politicians. I agree with that. And I want to add something more. I want to say that it should never be the function of the legislature of any country to inspect or to ferret out communists. It should be left to the executive branch. And then the executive branch should gather the evidence, while the judicial branch should find out how to evaluate this evidence and then prosecute the man as he should be prosecuted. But a man should never be put in a position where his innocence or guilt is in the shadows. He should never be placed in a position where, whether judged guilty or innocent, he's still condemned in the eyes of society. A man should be tried only by the courts, because only the courts have the power to say whether a man is definitely guilty or definitely innocent. Any other way would be judgment by anticipation.
No, Johnny, there's a difference between feasibility and morality. But returning to your point of conducting the investigation in secret, I think that is entirely undemocratic. Because who is going to conduct them? Is it the people or the government?
Wait a minute.
And if it is a democracy, then it should be the people and not the government.
Wait,
And
well,
therefore it should be in the public.
I
and in the
thought that
open.
in any orderly state you had a police, and
right.
I most certainly didn't believe that it was left to the people to catch criminals. I thought that the police was there to protect the people.
He didn't mean a secret trial, Ram, I'm sure.
Precisely. He meant, Ram, the secret gathering of evidence. But the actual trial of the man, the actual presentation of the evidence will be brought before the public.
Yes, it should be brought
See?
before the public.
Yes, and I think there are things that are still worse than outlawing the Communist Party. I think that it is still worse when you don't have any lines to operate according to, when you don't know what is right and what is wrong, when you don't know what you will be suspected for and what can pass. I was rather shocked after I came here once when I talked to a boy who didn't dare to go to a Russian movie because he had parents in the State Department. Another time I heard a congressional subcommittee ask a person whether she had ever uh, had a certain newspaper, ever subscribed on a certain newspaper. And I was shocked about it, because I thought that in any democratic country there would be such a freedom of expression that anybody could have the newspaper he wanted to.
Well, personally, I think outlawing the Communist Party is lazy. It just stresses the incompetence of a country to deal with it. But I want to get on to Ram about this British imperialism. Would you explain what you meant by
Well,
it?
just a minute, please, Peter. Why are you going to attack my point and transfer your argument to Rav? Isn't that unfair?
No, it is related.
No.
Really.
Oh, wait a minute. Give Johnny one word. Go ahead, Johnny.
He said that outlawing the Communist Party is a lazy method of fighting the Communist Party. I don't think so. I think you're taking a definite stand against it, and you're giving all your actions a legal basis. Where does laziness come in?
Well, because, well, you see, when you have a Communist Party in the country, that party is a real danger.
That's
But
right.
the Communist Party can never be prosperous unless there is some dissatisfaction in the country, unless there is poverty and illiteracy. And therefore the government has to deal with this poverty and this illiteracy in order to defeat communism. Therefore I think that communism is not at all doing only bad things, but if you outlaw the Communist Party, you simply don't get this benefit.
Look,
Now, wait. All right. Give Peter a chance. Go ahead.
Peter.
when I say it's lazy, I mean it's just pushing the issue further away by outlawing it. You said the situation in America was more difficult because communists are hidden here.
That's right.
If you outlaw your Communist Party, all you'll do in effect will be to drive it underground, away from being in the open, to behind the scenes, and then you have a problem difficult.
That isn't so. Now look, you contradict yourself. If it is really so that it would drive them underground, then instead of being lazy about it, why not let them stay in the open? Because that way we could catch them easier, according to your reasoning.
Yes.
However, you said that by outlawing them, that would drive them underground, and therefore would make it harder to catch them.
That's what I mean.
Is not? Now let me point out that it is harder to catch the man when he's underground. So the element of laziness does not enter into
When
it.
I said lazy, I meant that you were pushing the issue further away.
You are not pushing the issue further away when you recognize a danger and you take steps to mitigate that
To
danger.
push the danger further away from yourself, you're not doing anything by
When you
outlawing it.
recognize that a man has a fever, that is not pushing the issue away.
I grant you that. But
Oh,
you can't just
naturally.
say, I
Uh, uh, it's almost hilarious in how brilliantly Johnny is able to call out his friend in that debate by saying, "Why are you bringing a straw man?" Remember our discussion about the
Right.
straw man into this discussion. You attack my point of view, and yet you are diverting the topic to somebody else's country. So
Right.
let's take it one by one. So I love how sharp he is, and when you remember that these guys were teenagers asked to go to the United Nations. Well, I have a question. When you were a teenager, would you have done something like this?
Well, I did a debate as a teenager. I'm trying to remember if it was even before I was a teenager.
Hmm.
It was about capital punishment.
Awesome. In
Uh,
high school or something like that.
I'm trying to remember if it was in high school or in grade school. I mean, grade school for me included middle school, what's called middle school now.
Oh, okay.
Because I took the K-12. I was
Mm.
fortunate enough to go through an American,
Mm,
how do you call it, American school.
mm,
And I did a debate.
mm.
I had to sign up for pro capital punishment.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Mm.
I won.
Hey, congratulations. um, I've been asked to coach debate teams, collegiate debate teams, and
Mhm.
then from time to time join as a judge to also evaluate college debate teams when they go at it. Um, I would have to say that Johnny is skilled with using analogies. He's
Yes.
really good at that. He might not have named names, dates, times, and places, and yet the sheer logic of his argument, there's no arguing against that.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
I love the
Very
way
true.
that happened. Mm.
Well, the challenge that Gunnar had, I think it was more of a language issue.
Mm.
Okay, because he even had a hard time expressing himself or choosing the right words.
Yes.
So that was there. Even the British guy, is it Peter?
Yes.
The way he used lazy, I
Mm.
don't think he meant what Johnny understood lazy to be.
Yeah, like
Okay,
as it's
but
very easy. Yeah.
I don't think he meant that. But the way it
Mm.
was used,
Mm.
it came across as what Johnny pointed out, and Johnny was able to take advantage of it.
Mm.
Okay. In fact, he had to. Peter had to explain further on that when I say lazy, I mean like you're pushing the problem further away.
Yeah.
Okay. Rather than embracing it, you're putting further away. And maybe lazy wasn't the best word, or maybe it's a word that they use in England at that time. So I don't know. Okay. So,
If he had used the word convenient, maybe that would have had a different context rather than calling it lazy, because lazy
yeah,
uh, describes something like the a part of a person's character
right,
or a country's character, and nobody
right.
likes to ever be called that.
Lazy. Yeah,
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 especially because globally, I don't know if you still remember this. um we were stereotyped to Juan Tamad.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
The dude just laying underneath the banana tree or the coconut tree
Right,
waiting for the fruit to fall.
right.
So I would totally understand why Johnny would be triggered by a word like lazy.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
would be if I were there. I would be like, because Juan Tamad and the mindset behind
Right.
calling us that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the collapse of our educational system. Period.
Agreed. Agreed.
In fact, if you run into anybody who was educated in the 50s and 60s, chances
Mm.
are their English is good.
Yes. Yes. Uh,
It's grammatically correct and also sounds pretty good. It's not heavily accented, if you want to say, although it's still
mm,
there. But
yes.
their English is good.
Mm. I think when the Americans helped us to rebuild, they brought with them what they call what they call normals.
Thomasites.
Yeah, the
Thomasites.
Thomasites. Yeah,
Yes.
and they were really really good, because I remember my grandmother telling me stories about you graduated grade 6 and you could teach already. I mean, that was how good the quality of the education was
Right.
at
Right.
that time. And I'm with you that it has slipped over the years, because remember we had this mass exodus of teachers who went to become household helpers in other countries.
Yeah, that was sad, actually. Very
Mm.
sad. It's, more of a trivia thing. I'm actually a descendant of a Thomasite.
Seriously.
Yeah,
Wow.
hold on. My, let's see here. My paternal great grandfather. Yes, the father of my dad's mother.
Okay.
Okay. He's a Thomasite.
Ah.
My dad's middle name is Satterthwaite.
Oh, okay. There you go.
And they come from a little town in Iowa,
Mm.
Muscatine, Iowa. He
Wow.
was he was sent to the region or where my dad's from. My dad's from San Jose Antique, Iloilo.
Mm.
He was
Yeah.
supposed to be like the director general for the school system and stuff.
Mm. Iowa is a great state because it's very, very basic. It's a farming state, and people's values there are very grounded, if I
Right.
can say that.
Mhm.
Simple folk, very solid values, and education certainly was one of them.
Right.
And I
Oh,
think
sorry.
they okay, it is okay.
Go ahead.
And I think they kind of brought it with them here to the Philippines when they taught us as well. Um, Here's a question, because I'm curious. Would the Juan Tamad story or the mindset, did it also start there? Or was it there long before? Like, were the Spanish the ones who brought it with them?
I don't know.
Me neither.
chances are the Spanish, I think.
Mm,
But you know what's funny? Because again, this is going a little off the conversation.
yeah.
Even in the days of when there was a king and a queen, and you had the barons and you had the serfs, and those days.
Yeah.
Okay, if I was a serf and I didn't like the king, okay, I was smart enough to know that I controlled the production of the crops.
Right.
So if I would rebel, what would I do? I'd get lazy. I'd start, no, I don't want to work. It's difficult.
Oh, I like what's happening in China, right? In the lie flat thing with the young people.
Yeah, it could be. You just start getting lazy, but it was an indirect way of complaining to the king
Hmm.
that I didn't like you. Okay. And it's funny because you look at work today, it's the same thing. If you don't like the boss, you don't, you know, what do you do?
And that's what you mentioned earlier, quiet quitting.
Oh no, quiet quitting is a. We could talk about that another day, but
Yeah.
that's I found it to be a funny moniker.
Hmm.
Okay.
So far, the debate between the teenagers has been, to me, very grown up. Amazingly, uh,
Right,
despite the fact that they're all teenagers, they come across as very mature young men and respectful because they followed the prompts of the lady who acted as the moderator.
right,
Like when she said, "Oh, let's let Johnny talk," they would stop. They'd let him, and then when she'd say, "Oh, why don't we hear what Gunnar has to say about it?" Then
right,
they'd also pause to let him talk. So there was a great deal of civility and respect in this debate.
right.
Um,
Absolutely.
so let's continue with the video.
Recognize he has the fever and then leave it at that. Put him in
Precisely.
an isolation
But you
ward.
can do this. You can say, I recognize the fever, I recognize it is bad, and because it is bad, I will take measures to prevent its further spread.
And not do anything to him.
Why not do anything to him? Cure him?
But you're just curing him by outlawing the fever like that.
No, the point is this. By outlawing him, you recognize its evil. And the minute you recognize its evil, you take steps to remove that evil.
Do you want to tell us what you're doing in the Philippines, Johnny?
Well, it might take a little bit long, but I'll just give the general background. I'd like to say that a few years ago, the civilians in the Philippines were more afraid of their army than they were of the communists. This was because the army had committed abuses against the civilian population. But a few years ago, a man was sent to the Philippines, and one of our Filipino leaders, and he cleaned out the army by reorganizing it. That man's name is Magsaysay, and he's now our president. The first thing he did was to make it punishable by death for a firing squad, the abuse of any civilian by any soldier. After a few court-martials and a few executions before the firing squad, discipline was restored in the army. He did many more things to restore the morale of the army. He removed the subversives within it, and then he divided the army into small, compact units which could strike with deadly efficiency and deadly mobility at any point within the Philippines. But that was
Strike for what, Johnny?
strike against any communist in any part of the Philippines.
I see.
There was a time when the army was such a big mass that it was unwieldy. But by dividing it into small, efficient compartments, he could distribute it anywhere with fast.
But you didn't tell us that there were guerrilla communists all over the Philippines, and that was the reason why he had to do this with the army.
Yes, that
Now
is
tell
one
us
of the
how he
reasons.
dealt with the guerrillas.
Now the point is this, it is not enough to kill a communist. As much as possible, it would be better to bring a communist alive and change him to your ways of thinking. So what Magsaysay did was this. He put in a program of land reform, which in simple terms was this. He said, for every communist without a criminal record, there is a piece of land for himself and for his family. Therefore, if that person has no criminal record, he can come down and become a capitalist. That is why I'm fond of saying that one of the best ways of treating a communist is to make him a capitalist.
Yes, but if you have made the communists in your country into capitalists, why should you be so afraid of the communist propaganda? I think you must realize that the dangerous communists, the intellectuals, will remain communists anyway. They are not influenced by the communist propaganda, and
right.
they will go underground. But
All right.
the reason for outlawing the Communist Party, I think, must be to prevent communist propaganda. And I can see that communist propaganda would be dangerous in a prosperous country where people are satisfied.
You see,
Precisely.
Johnny,
But you see,
Wait, let Ram have a turn.
the point is that the methods that were adopted in your country would not quite work in our country because the
Alright.
basic assumption was that poverty and illiteracy produce communism. But as we find it worked, it doesn't seem to be working that way. Because in India, while you do have a great deal of poverty and of illiteracy, you do not have communism rampant in those sections. Paradoxically enough, communism is most rampant among the educated people and among the rich people and among the minority. And of course that represents a very great potential danger. And the reason is to be found. I mean, why is it so? It is not what normally expects. And therefore a different type of solution has to be found. And perhaps your solution, which you adopted in Philippines, may not work because the circumstances are quite different.
all right, it might not work in the
Johnny, wait
Philippines.
just a minute. We've got to give Peter
you
a
very
chance
much.
to get back on his point when Ram said that British imperialism had caused communism in India.
You
Entirely.
can't just leave it in the air. You must tell me how British
You see,
imperialism
the point is this. If you assume that poverty produces a communism, you make that assumption, don't you?
Yes.
Then you see, then you have to bring out the relationship between British imperialism and poverty. Now, British imperialism caused poverty in India. That is fairly obvious. Because I tell you what,
maintained poverty in India.
well, it has helped to perpetuate poverty in India.
It hasn't helped to perpetuate.
I'll give you an
poverty.
example. For instance, you see, India was not allowed to manufacture her own cotton. She had to produce raw cotton to send to Lancashire. Otherwise, what would have happened to the Lancashire cotton mills?
What would have happened to the cotton if she hadn't had a market for it?
Yes, where would she have sold the cotton? So she had to find India as a market, as a source of raw material, and therefore not allow India to be industrialized. And therefore India is poor. Or even assuming from the other ground that it is the educational system or the educated unemployed who are communists. Well, the result is because the educational system is not coordinated with the economic organization.
Well, in Britain, we consider that the most rampant cause of communism in India is the caste system. The fact that in your society there must be poor and there must be rich.
Far from it. In fact, I think that one of the greatest obstacles to communism in India is the caste system.
Oh,
It is
I
a-
can't see that.
Ram,
Yes, it
wait
is.
a minute. You just said a while ago that that communism springs from poverty, and because of that you blame the British. Now look, the caste system perpetuates poverty in India. It prevents a man from rising better than his father was.
You see, the
and
point
can,
is
can you
this.
That's
deny
what you-
Go
that
ahead, Stuart,
in
go ahead.
India you find the most extreme poverty and the most extreme richness in the world?
Yes, coming to your question of the caste system and yours.
Precisely.
You see, the point is this, that besides poverty and illiteracy, for communism you also require an atmosphere of challenge, an atmosphere of rebellion, an atmosphere of discontentedness. And that you do not find in India, because the caste system has taught them that the miserable plight in which they are is what they deserve, and there is something that they cannot overrule, or something that they cannot challenge.
But there must be some feeling of indignation against that which breeds
Precisely.
communism.
I cannot believe that a man would have the mind of a worm, that he would be so spineless, that he would not rebel at the position in which society puts him.
Yes.
Anyway, the caste system doesn't operate anymore, does it? At least for the untouchables.
No, it doesn't, but it is not quite so strong. But the system itself does exist in the villages. But it doesn't in any way help communism. It's one of the chief obstacles to communism. And as far as the big gap between the rich and the poor is concerned, that is again the British.
That
That
was
is the
there
direct
before
result
the
of British rule.
came. That was there before the British came.
No, but the British perpetuated it. Do you know how the British ruled India? They ruled them through the landlords, as they called them. It was the landlords who ruled India.
Before the British came, India was divided up into a small set of princeling states ruled by extremely rich men.
That is right.
Britain carried on that,
Yes,
that
Britain
system.
perpetuated it. Yes, that's
But
right.
they united India. They gave India the most complete civil service system.
The fact that they united India does not mean that they helped India to prevent it from becoming communist.
For a while, because now the argument is strangely diverting away from a discussion about communism and a discussion about imperialism and how it kept India poor. So I like the way that Johnny was trying to bring it back to where it originally was, by again using analogies. But for the first time, he actually used specific example and by citing Magsaysay, the Hook Rebellion. So this time, as far as evidence goes, there were names, dates, places, and he described the strategies that were being employed to keep communism under control. So the judge in me says, okay, he's getting a lot of points now because
Right.
he's being tangible. He's not just using logic, but he's also using historical evidence.
Right. The one thing that struck me though was he was right. Okay, but the one thing that struck me is I don't know how the conversation about why communism exists shifted to poverty and illiteracy, if you want to say.
Mm.
When Johnny himself mentioned it was the abuse of the military,
Yeah.
that's why the Hook Rebellion existed.
Mm.
It had nothing to do with poverty
And illiteracy, yeah.
and no, none. It was
Mm.
the people in power being abusive.
Mm.
Period. Okay, and I can understand why that might want to lead to some kind of rebellion.
Mm.
Okay, and even in the Philippines at that time, it was still a lot of landlords. Okay, who
Right.
pretty much
Yeah.
ran everything. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that they're in cahoots with the military and the police and everybody else. Okay,
Mm.
and I mean, I wouldn't in that case. But what I couldn't figure out is how come the conversation jumped from abuses to poverty and illiteracy.
Right.
Okay, I won't deny that poverty leads to crime. I won't deny that.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe even illiteracy. But to make the jump to communism, that one's a little strange. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's what I found difficult. But that wasn't Johnny's fault. I think that was Ram who started it.
Yes. I noticed that he seemed to have, for lack of a better term, a more modern phrase is a hard on for the English guy.
Well, I
Like,
would imagine. Come on, the British didn't treat the Indians well.
yeah, true enough.
Period. They didn't. Okay,
Yeah.
and some of their policies led to the death of like
Yeah.
tens of millions of Indians.
Mm.
Okay, and you can't really blame the Indians for being, having a sense of animosity towards them, if you want to say.
Yeah, in fairness, he was also right about that because Gandhi, who was the first to practice what do you call this, passive resistance.
Right.
I remember the movie with Ben Kingsley where
Yeah.
it was so graphic, and wow, I mean, that's how they free themselves from the yoke of the British by
Right.
refusing to, as you said, if you don't like who's in charge, just slow down your work. And so they stop producing salt.
Slow down your work.
Yeah.
That's a trick. Even they did in the medieval times. It was the same thing.
Mhm. True. That wouldn't have worked in Japan though, because they had the samurais, and you would have had your head cut off if you didn't make enough for the feudal lord.
No, but strangely, the Japanese also had a very stringent. How would you say? It's not. I wouldn't say a caste system, but they definitely had societal layers
Yes.
and they were very strict about it too. Okay,
Mm. Mm.
I mean, you could get your head cut off if you were pretending to be a samurai.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? You could,
Mm.
but the amazing thing is this, and well, this has to go more with uh, I don't know if you want to say this, but I was watching. There's a documentary. I don't know if you know who McNamara was, but I think
Yeah. Yeah. U.S.
he was the
Senator.
secretary, no,
Uh,
secretary of
a sec
defense
secret. Yeah. Okay.
under
During the Vietnam era.
Johnson. Yeah, during the
Yeah.
Vietnam era.
Yeah.
And he actually had a conversation with his counterpart, his Vietnamese counterpart.
Oh.
Okay, and the things they already had settled down and all. And what McNamara couldn't understand, the Vietnamese was just saying, "Hey, we don't want you in our country. It's not yours." That's what he was saying.
Yeah.
But McNamara couldn't understand. We're coming here to give you something better.
Okay.
That was his point of view, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and he couldn't understand why the Vietnamese wouldn't want it.
Mm.
Okay, the Vietnamese guys just get out of our land. Okay,
Mm.
and unfortunately, that shows up with Peter coming across as we're bringing you something better.
Mm. Mm.
You know what I mean? Okay, and if what's even crazier is during the times of imperialism, yes, okay, the British had all the right to feel like that they were. I wouldn't say all the right, but they definitely felt like they were God appointed to bring betterment to the world, if you want to say.
Yeah.
But the
w-
craziest, go
yeah.
ahead.
Sorry, I was just agreeing with you because when you become such an imperial power, that sort of brings with it a level of arrogance that causes you to impose or project your cultural beliefs on a conquered race.
Right,
And when you think about it, China has a one of the oldest, if not the oldest civilization. So you'd think it be the most mature. And when the British came over there to try to impose their will, that led to all sorts of troubles.
oh yeah,
so
it did.
um, so the point there is. And I get where Ram is coming from. That when the British came to India, say, hey, as you said, we're bringing a better system here. Be-
Right,
and yet, based on, and the two agreed that the British perpetuated
poverty.
the poverty.
Right.
Sad.
Actually, the thing about what's even ironic about it is, if you think about it, the Indian civilization has been there much longer than the British civilization.
Right.
So how can you tell me I'm coming here to give you, enlightenment when they've been around?
Mm,
That's even the funnier part. But again, it's a little digressing from the
yeah, it
speech
is.
itself. Okay, but you'll also notice that Ram became more emphatic
Mm,
and more, how would you say, uh,
assertive.
I would say assertive, but also more believable when they started
Mm,
attacking him.
mm,
Okay, all right. He came across as far more, yeah, believable in my eyes, because they, how do you call, they started attacking him.
yeah.
Okay.
Uh, although that was probably not their initial intent until
No,
Ram did mention that British um, um, helped to perpetuate the poverty and the caste system. So
right.
then they, yeah. This debate is like a time capsule of history during that particular era.
Era.
And the lady moderator was saying, yeah, but those things are in the past, right? It's no longer really happening. And then Ram corrected them by saying, it's still happening in the remote villages. It's still there. Mm.
Well, in the 50s, I think it was still everywhere in India.
Yeah.
It only,
Oh.
from what I know, it only calmed down, or it started leveling out 80s, 90s.
Mm.
But in the
Mm.
50s and 60s, there was still a very strong factor
Yeah.
uh, in India.
If I recall, that red dot that they have in their forehead
Mhm.
uh means something, and I think it's the brightness of it, or how dark it is, or how big it is, would
Mhm.
seem to indicate your place in their system, their
In their
caste system.
system, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So interesting how the debate went from purely about communism to imperialism. So it's hovering between these two isms, if
Right,
you'd like to say.
right. But I think overall, the biggest difficulty is they already labeled communism as a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, that was at the beginning.
Mm-mm.
Okay, and I think it was only the British said, the Peter said, "Oh, we don't label it as a problem."
Mm.
Okay, so even just by labeling it as a problem, we already gave it a bad name in itself.
Mm.
Okay, but that's for another discussion.
True,
Okay.
true. And
Yeah,
again, it's because of where each one is coming from, because communism is expressed differently in different countries. I know that in the UK, their biggest issue was with Ireland, with the IRA. I think the IRA would be like the very, very first version of terroristic activity, if you could call it that.
Mhm.
And that's why the SAS, when they came out, were the pioneers. I mean,
Uh-huh.
the Navy SEALs learned from them.
Right. Right.
Because they had to deal with insurgency way ahead of everyone else
Right.
before.
Right.
And then I think some of the SAS even trained the Israel soldiers on how to deal with that as well, because they've had a lot of experience with it too.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
So I guess we owe it to our viewer to finish listening
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
debate. Okay, here we go.
India got her freedom from Britain when she gained her independence. She had a civil service system that gave her at least 3 years advance over Pakistan, because Pakistan had no comparable system of civil service.
Well, Pakistan was under the same administration in the British India. That's not the point. But the point is that imperialism produced poverty, it produced educated unemployed, it produced a state of illiteracy, because you're not educated and interesting, and therefore it produced communism.
I won't listen to the word produced.
Well, it caused,
I
if you
won't
like.
hear that word caused.
All right, would you listen to the word? It maintained.
Maintained.
Oh, it's the
To
same.
a lesser degree.
It's the same thing.
To a lesser degree.
It doesn't matter whether you cause a man to be poor. What makes it worse is you keep him poor.
But if you keep him poor to a lesser degree of poverty, there was some education system put into India that wasn't
Yes.
there before.
I agree with that.
Witness the number of people who were able to read and write and go into a civil service.
But you must
Well, look,
admit
kids, let's take the second half of the question, because after all, British imperialism in India is now a thing of the past, is it not?
Yes.
As we bury it, do you want to say a word or two over its...
Well, I will say one thing, that British imperialism did produce communism in India, but one of the greatest events of this century has been the independence of Asia. The British have acted very statesmanlike in giving independence to India, Pakistan, Burma and Ceylon. This I will say for the British, because if you had not given independence to India, India might have been communist today. But because you delayed the independence, you caused poverty and illiteracy, and therefore you have helped in India having a potential threat of communism.
Well, how can you explain that the most popular leaders of India against the British were not the communists?
Well, that is because the primary issue then was not against communism, but it was nationalism, directed against imperialism.
Yes, but you're saying we caused communism in your country. Surely if the British imperialism had caused communism, the people would have followed communism.
You see, the thing that saved it was that communism did not join hands with imperialism. Now take Indochina. In Indochina, it is just that nationalism and communism are joining hands against imperialism, and therefore there is a greater threat of communism.
Johnny, what do you want to say?
I'd like to say one more word over the dead body of British imperialism in India. Ram said that the British acted very statesmanlike in getting out of India. I'd like to say that they did get out, but they got out only because they were pinched. They had to get out. There was no element of statesmanship in it at all.
We got out just in time to appear magnanimous.
That's right.
So I say it myself.
Well, there is a pretty good feeling between the Hindus and the British today, is
Yes.
there not?
Well,
Well,
witness the
definitely.
fact
I
that
hope
even
so.
though India gained her independence, she still remains within the Commonwealth as a
No, that's
republic.
because she chose to, yes. That's
Yes,
no
she chose to.
relationship. She chose to of her own
Now,
accord.
there's another half of the question we started out to discuss that we perhaps should deal with for just one more moment. That is there more than one solution for the problem of communism?
Certainly.
Well, the thing to do is that first of all you have to be aware that the way of dealing with communism is not to use communist techniques against them, is not to condemn them. Extremism of any form is bad. To counteract communism in communist ways is as bad as communism itself.
Yes, and I think another important thing to notice is that the worst thing you can do to combat communism is not to realize what communism is. I think it is dangerous to limit to confuse the limits, to persecute innocent people.
What is your point, Ram, about the future that we have to look at in India? Do you see a constant communist threat? Do you see it ameliorating at all?
Well, I would say that communism, in fact, I'm very optimistic about the future, because communism is never a long-term arrangement. Because communism really is barter. You see, you buy your bread and sell your freedom. Because, you see, the animal instincts in man are more fundamental than the human instincts. But the moment you get your bread, you want back your freedom. You see? And therefore, communism, in my opinion, is never a long-term arrangement. And really speaking, communism is imperialism. It is a device for imperialism. It is a new way of dealing with imperialism. In the past, for example, the other imperialists like the British had different ways of dealing with imperialism. They made it quite explicit. But the communists have a different type of imperialism. Now this they make it in such a way that nationalism is completely dissolved. For example, there is imperialism in China. China is being ruled by Russia today. But the Chinese people owe their primary allegiance not to China, but to the communist world. And therefore, they are dictated by Moscow. But soon a time will come when China will awaken from that slumber and she will realize that she is being ruled by Russia. And therefore, I predict a bitter conflict between China and Russia. And that is inevitable. And the day that conflict comes, that will be the liberation of the world from the shackles of communism.
It's a very optimistic note. Do you agree with this, Johnny?
I think that all these three people are naive in the sense that they
Are
fail
naive?
because they fail to recognize the fact that communism is not just a self-contained unit in its country. I maintain that it is a worldwide conspiracy, that every communist party in the world is subservient to Moscow, that the sooner you outlaw it, the better, because the sooner shall you have a legal basis on which to proceed against them. Now, some will say that this is using communist tactics. I do not see how that can be. There may be some resemblance, but this is the point. You say that in restricting communism by outlawing it, that you're restricting human freedom. But look, when you restrict freedom, it does not always mean to say that by restricting freedom, it is bad. When you restrict the freedom of a rattlesnake, it is not bad. And the same thing applies to the communists.
I think that it is important to remember that we are not only trying to fight communism, we are also trying to preserve democracy. And I consider freedom of expression as one of the most precious values democracy can offer. And I don't think you can defend democracy by limiting the freedom of expression. You can't defend democracy by losing it.
Well, what
Can
I
you
would...
an answer for that? Wait a minute, Peter. You an answer for that?
I'd like to say that I'm not talking about limiting democracy. You say that we must preserve democracy. And the only way to preserve democracy today is to do away with communism.
It depends on what you mean by democracy, because the communists say that communism is democracy.
Well, when I say about democracy, I'm speaking of the kind of society in which I now live. I will not go into any argument with the communists. When I say democracy, I mean the society in which I live.
Yes, and a society with freedom of expression for the minorities.
Well, I would...
And
I
men
would
is a right.
Give Peter a chance. He's
Just
only
one
got
point.
about 15 seconds. I'm
All right.
sorry. You've got to give it to him. He
a
needs
man
the last
has a right
word.
to speak. I think that communism is the antithesis of freedom, and anyone who endangers freedom, who restricts it, such as outlawing communism, by the restriction of that freedom, is in fact aiding communism.
Well,
I'm sorry. We've got to end there.
Those were powerful arguments uh, coming from both sides.
Right.
The way I saw it, Ram, as the representative of India, managed to show us that he's thinking more strategically, like the big picture,
Right.
and he made a lot of really powerful points, except for where he said that eventually China will rise up against Russia. Well, that might happen, but it hasn't happened yet.
Hmm.
And far from Russia conquering the world, it looks like China is more interested in doing that. Although he also made a good point in that communists tend to declare themselves as democracies, and I like the way that Johnny called him out on that. What is your definition of democracy? Because in Korea, don't they call it the people's, the Korean, Democratic Republic of Korea or something like DPK? Yeah. Anyway, so they call themselves a democracy, but they're not. North Korea is definitely not. So um, both had good arguments. I would say Johnny was very effective where the operational side or the tactical
Mhm.
side of dealing with communism is concerned. Though I must give points to Ram for the strategic big picture mindset that he also provides the
Mhm.
viewers. So this was a very well-rounded discussion
Mhm.
from my
Right.
perspective, in that it
Right.
didn't just look at the local issues, it looked at the global issues as well, thanks to having so many representatives from different country have that opportunity to weigh in.
Right. Actually, the what Johnny excelled in was his reasoning, if you want to say, was easy to understand.
True.
Remember, I was having difficulty jumping from imperialism caused communism. I couldn't see. I know I couldn't see the. I understood what he was trying to say,
Mm.
but I couldn't quite add it up in my mind. Okay, it just wasn't making complete sense. The guy for me who was making a lot of sense was Gunnar. The problem was his English capacity
Yeah.
was also limiting his ability to express it clearly.
Mm.
Uh, see, I don't see Peter. Um, he had the same issue. Okay,
Mm.
I couldn't quite understand the I was having difficulty connecting the dots in his argument.
Mm.
Okay, so it didn't add up quickly in my mind what he was trying to say. All right, the that's why Johnny stood out. Okay,
True.
his analogies were good, and his reasoning was clear.
Mm.
You know, 1 plus 1 equals 2. Okay, in some cases, 1 plus 1 equals 3. Okay, I said, how did that happen? so, so
Mm. And he was also the one who was very skilled with the use of analogies
yeah,
and naming names, dates, times, and places, and referring to one of the more loved presidents of our republic. That's
yes,
Magsaysay. Um, if I recall, wasn't he the one who opened up Malacanang for the ordinary man, so that
yeah,
if you
yeah.
wanted to, you could literally just walk in and
He was also famously known for saying, "Who enacted the law of supply and demand? let's, let's abolish that law." But he was a people's president, if you want to say. In
Mm.
fact, there's still the conspiracy theories that the United States helped in his death. Okay,
Oh, you
those are
mean
still
the that
persisting.
that plane crash? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Those still persist because he was a little too communist. He was a
Mm,
little too people oriented.
mm. And yet
Okay,
he did everything he could to eradicate the threat in the Philippines.
but the funny thing is, he knew what the cause was. It was abusive army,
Yeah.
maybe police at that time,
Mm,
and even giving somebody a parcel of land.
yeah.
That sounds very communist.
True.
Sounds okay.
Mm,
All right. So they're pretty much I mean, and the Americans had such a scare with communism. They could see bread
mm.
everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. No, they did. But
Yeah.
again, the most Americans don't look back at that time as a good time, at least when it comes to that. Because the
Mm.
50s was like a golden era for the United States.
Oh,
If
yeah.
if you were white. Okay.
I remember that was also the time that women became more involved because of so many men were lost in combat. So
Well,
they had jobs and
actually, that's again is a little off topic, but what had happened there was because the men went off to war, tama,
yeah, they did.
the women started doing the man's work.
Yes.
When the man came back, the woman said, "Hey, I'm enjoying myself. I
Yeah.
like what I'm doing. Look, I can do this too."
Yeah.
So,
And that's when families had both mom and dad working. I think
well,
that's
uh, because I grew up, my parents only my dad worked. How about you?
oh, um, they both did.
Okay, all right. In my case, it was only my dad worked.
Mm,
Um, it was still possible then.
mm,
Okay, but admittedly, my dad that happened because my dad got a job in the NFAO.
mm,
Okay,
mm.
but when they were in the Philippines, still before they left for Rome, uh, both of my parents were working
Awesome. You know,
before that.
so if we summarize the whole experience of watching part one of this debate, part of me is tempted to watch part two, but I'm already satisfied with our one of our viewers asking us to analyze him because he really was a good debate speaker.
Right. Yeah.
So again, thank you so much for recommending him to us
Yes.
as a speaker to analyze. Paul and I both appreciate it because we both
Definitely.
did not know he even existed until You wrote to us and said, "Why don't you do an analysis of Johnny Antillon?" So thumbs up to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. I agree.
Mm. So as we come to the conclusion of the show, um, and you like what you see, it's just a little simple like, subscribe, share, and do leave comments because we do read them. You may have noticed we have responded to as many of them as possible. I mean, almost all of them, when time permits. So, for episode 12, the season ender for Tip Talks, we'll be going into what we call an analysis of catchphrases, those that annoy, those that became favorites, and I guess that's why they became annoying. And those that didn't make sense, but were just used because they happen to be popular. So, as ever,
Uh,
remember that learning is a never ending journey with limitless vistas.